Hello, hello! Welcome to Author's Corner. We're here tonight with David VanDyke. Welcome.
Thank you.
How's everything?
Well, it's pretty good, Lance. What can I tell you? We're on the road in an RV. What could be better in the middle of a pandemic?
Yeah, most of these we've been doing over Zoom or some other video call. And so, I always ask him, where are you joining us from? So, do you even have a base of operations, or are you pure nomadic right now?
Pure nomadic. I mean, we have a residence in Arizona, but that's about it. Keep a few ties. But we've been on the road for about 6 months, full-time RV. Haven't only seen a few zombies in the apocalypse here, but they are out there.
They were in Florida, weren't they?
We avoided Florida. Yeah, we heard they were in Florida. We avoided Florida.
We're going to talk about your books, but yeah, how is the RV lifestyle?
Well, that's something to get used to. We did a few summers and 3 or 4 months at a time, so we were sure that we could do it. And then when the whole COVID thing and house prices gone crazy, we sold out and went full time the way we wanted to do, and it's worked out. We're enjoying it. Semi-retired, I guess you'd call it, or self-employed.
Nice.
Self-employed, independent author. That's the deal.
Excellent. So, these almost always start out with the same prompt. Tell us about your books, man.
Oh, what can I say about my books? I'm an author of roughly 30 books, mostly science fiction. I do have 5 detective fiction, non-science fiction books, but the main bread and butter is these science fiction books, Plague Wars series. See the first one there, it says a Plague Wars novel, David VanDyke. These are what some people call self-published or independently published through Amazon and other sources. I guess I could call myself also a hybrid author since I have had a couple books published, traditionally published, but mostly it's been independently published on my own, done all my own work, done the writing, done the editing, choose the covers, do all that stuff for myself, and it's worked out really well in this digital age since about 2009 when Kindle...
That was my next question. How long have you been doing this?
Well, Kindle came out, I believe, in 2009, and I had a couple friends. I still have a couple friends. They're still around, and they're still my friends, so I guess I still have a couple friends. Some of you guys might have heard of them. They're arguably bigger authors than I am. B.V. Larson, pretty famous, and Von Hepner. And I grew up with those guys. We played D&D together and stuff like that back in the 70s and 80s when we were growing up. We're all in our 50s now. And somehow we had this synergy, this gelling of sci-fi and fantasy, brain stuff going on. And we all ended up being authors, but they did it first.
I think we've seen a lot of those like D&D groups,
Mm-hmm.
right? Kind of already have that flow, that storytelling mentality.
Yeah. And they work off each other. And so when I saw them, I was in the military, and I saw those guys when the Kindle came out. They took a lot of their books that they had in the can, so-called in the can. In other words, they had them on hard drives or whatever. Had never been able to get them published traditionally. Or you have to submit. You have to get an agent. You submit it. You get somebody approved. They have to publish it. It's a big gatekeeper thing. When Kindle came out, Amazon lets you publish straight to, essentially, to the reader. And the reader likes it, they buy it. They don't like it, but there's no gatekeeper in between. Amazon just publishes pretty much whatever you put up there as long as it's within their guidelines. So these guys started taking their old books, shaping them up, cleaning them up, putting covers on them, and then, bam, they went through the roof. All of a sudden, they were making, they went from making, just getting by to all of a sudden these guys are doing really, really well. And I thought, I'm getting out of the military, retiring from the military, working for the government, but I could do this. So I started writing books, I first started hammering on the typewriter for fiction purposes.
What was this, a literal typewriter? I have to ask.
Thank you. No, not a literal typewriter. It was a computer.
Not gonna lie, that'd be pretty cool. But
no, it was a desktop computer. But word processor program, typical thing. But the point is, I think it was April 6th of 2012, first book, and that was this one, Eden Plague, first book I ever wrote, revised it about 30 times. And by the end of 2014, I was making more money as an independent author, and I think I'd written 8 or 9 books by that time in my first 2 years.
Wow.
Maybe
in your
more.
first 2 years, you say?
No, I think it was actually 13 books. First year was 8 books. I wrote 8 books my first year.
8 books your first year?
I just caught the bug. I think there's a honeymoon period with writers, and I think I caught the bug. So I was going to work, and I was coming home, and I was just writing like a madman.
Dang.
3 or 4 hours a day, 6 to 8 hours on each day, weekend day. My wife hardly saw me. She saw me come home, said hi. we ate dinner, and then I went into my writing room, and she handled the kids. They were teenagers at the time, and I just wrote and wrote and wrote. And I was just like a crazy guy, but it worked out. I got lucky. The things caught on, and this Plague War series, like I said, blow my own horn a little bit, but Plague War series. There are actually 17 books in that series.
There's 17 books in that series?
Well, in the greater series, I would say in that saga.
So in that universe, so to speak,
yeah,
there are 17 books, but you don't have to read all 17 to get the story, right?
No, it's apocalyptic, but it's not post-apocalyptic. So let me clarify that. So it's the world undergoes an apocalypse and it convulses, but it never like turns into zombies. And there are no zombies, by the way. No zombies were harmed in the making of these books whatsoever. but the world does progress and convulse, and and then the aliens show up later, and there's ground battles and space battles, and it's generally in the military science fiction realm, I would say. But I wrote about 12 of them, I would say, and that was kind of the conclusion. And then people wanted more, so I jumped forward 100 years within the universe, took some of the same characters who were functionally immortal, you would say, and then put them 100 years in the future, more into the space opera kind of camp, where they're out there in space doing stuff like that. Yeah. So that was the foundation, the bread and butter series that really made my bones. And then I went on to do some other projects. I've got another space series. I've got a detective series, no science fiction at all. I kind of worked with my brother on some urban fantasy books. When you don't have to worry about publishers and pleasing publishers, and you're an independent author doing all digital, pretty much all digital. I mean, these are paperbacks, but they're print on demand. For every paperback I sold 100 to 200 digital copies, Kindle copies, or Apple or Nook or whatever. And that's where it really comes.
So you do have physical books, but really,
yes.
really your ebook.
Yeah, if we were still in the physical print age, I'd be toast. I know you, Lance, have been often hawk your books, physical books, to guys at school.
Mine's the exact opposite. My ebook sales are dismal, but yeah, I sell a lot of hardcovers. So.
And that's awesome. You got beautiful hardcovers. I don't know if you got one of you. You should grab one of yours and wave.
Sure, we'll grab one.
Maybe they've seen it already, but hey, what the heck? Yeah, he's got beautiful hardcovers. I love your covers, and he's got a great story there. And you go talk to mostly the school kids and stuff, because they're.
Yeah. So a lot of mine, in fact, I got to the point where I didn't even introduce myself as an author anymore. I'd introduce myself as a storyteller, because I wasn't really spending most of my time writing books anymore. I was spending most of my time traveling around telling stories. And
that is, I mean, I am totally in awe of you being able to do that. I remember you telling me at one point you were doing like 200 dates a year, pre-COVID and all that.
Oh yeah.
That's working hard. So my good fortune was that once the writing was done, really it became a matter of digital marketing. You got to advertise, you got to get your name out there, but obviously with digital stuff, just like writing apps or writing computer games or writing anything else in the digital world, once it gets out there and it catches on and you make a certain amount of name for yourself, you kind of hit a snowball effect. And so my sales have been pretty good, pretty steady ever since, somewhere around 8 or 9 books, and it caught on. People started maybe recommending word of mouth, and I got up there as some of the, at least on Kindle, as one of the top 100 sci-fi authors and stuff like that, which I never would have predicted. It's absolutely amazing what you guys can do in the digital realm anymore, what people can do, all because Amazon. I mean, a lot of people like to rag on Amazon, but Amazon really broke the door open, just kicked the door open for digital publishing with the Kindle. And whether you do all Kindle or whether you also do Apple or Nook platforms or any of the other ones, you have to say, God bless Amazon for doing that, because there's a whole lot more working authors doing it now than there used to be, just because of that in the last 10 or 15 years.
Oh yeah, entire communities. And it sounds like you've been there almost from the beginning.
Well, allowed me to quit my government job. I'd retired and started working for the government. It was just kind of a soul-crushing, mind-numbing job.
I've heard that about government jobs.
Great people, but the system is the system. So to get away from that and to do what I love, to write, to tell stories, to meet fans, to go to conventions, and be fortunate enough to be, to win a few awards here and there, and it's really nice to have that. It's a whole totally different world.
Now, I have a couple questions here. So first of all, your first year, you were pumping out like a book a month.
Yeah, month and a half. Yeah, 2 months or whatever. Yeah.
Did you ever foresee getting back to that level of production, or was that just like your your moment of inspirational flood?
Yeah, I think I call that the honeymoon period. I think it's when a lot of times when people get hold of something new and it excites them, whatever that new interest is, and they achieve some success at it. I think it's very important that when you have a new interest and you achieve success, and the success, when I say success, it's a multitude of levels. Not only am I seeing the sales, I'm actually receiving money. I'm getting people saying, wow, this is really neat. I'm getting people contacting me about, it's like, hey, I'm considering buying the rights. The game, a few game companies have contacted me. Nothing's ever happened, but some they're like, hey, maybe we want to use some of your material in our games or make a game based on your stuff. It's a lot of ego or a lot of validation in there.
Oh, and for authors, that validation is such a drug.
It is. It's a drug. It's incredible.
Somebody comes up and says, "Oh, I loved your book," and it's just
yeah, that's right.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Oh yeah. Authors live for that stuff, guys.
Yeah.
If you have a favorite author, go tell them you loved their books.
It is. It
never gets old.
No.
Never gets old.
Well, I think most people can have had a moment in their life when somebody said that they affected them positively. It was like, thank you very much for doing that, whatever it was. It might have been very personal, or it might have been, they were a teacher, or they just did something. And so fans of books will sometimes say, I had a rough time in my life and I read your books, and they sometimes it's just they entertained me, but we've had fan mail that said, I was undergoing chemotherapy and your books gave me something to think about and take my mind off my situation, or just the usual thing of, man, I really love your books, please sign this book, and the fanboy type stuff. That's all really cool. And especially early on, before you get used to it, then it can, like you said, it's really a drug, and it can drive you. But after, probably, I would just say every year the production became less and less for various reasons. Sometimes it was that I had told the stories I wanted to tell. There was stuff in my head from years of living, and I just run out of, in a certain extent, you run out of juice, and you try to hit a plateau, and it's like being a runner. You sprint at the start, then you hit a pace, and you just you pace yourself. So if you think of your favorite authors, and George R.R. Martin, God love him, is probably the most famous example of everybody waiting for it. Where's that darn book? We're waiting for another book, and it
becomes a little bit more pressure than the joy of it.
Yeah, I'm just pointing at him as an obvious example of many authors will either hit a wall, or their production will be reduced, and so mine has just become more of a steady thing. Up until the pandemic, I was releasing 1 or 2 books a year. I'd like to get back to that. I think that would be very happy doing 1 or 2 books a year, maybe 3. But I just took a big breather with the pandemic and all that, and all the other things that happened. Selling the house, going full-time RV, breaking my leg. That's another story.
I was about to say, we were talking before the show started. There was a lot more than just the pandemic, selling your house and going full-on nomadic. That would be enough life upheaval for anybody. But yes, you also broke your leg. You know what? I gotta hear. Can you tell us that story?
Oh, sure. Just a little story. I think everybody's had an injury story, but yeah, I just bought this lovely new RV, put the ramp down. I was in Houston, Texas. If anybody knows anything about Houston, if you don't like the weather, wait 15 minutes, it'll change. So all of a sudden it started sprinkling, raining a little bit. The back of the ramp got a little bit slick. I didn't realize it. I've always been a relatively physical, balanced person. Hadn't broken a bone since I was 15. And foot went out from under me. The other foot came down, snapped all 3 bones right above the ankle. So if this were my foot, they snapped right here above the ankle. And thank God I was in Houston, because it's the best place to get orthopedic surgery, I think, within the United States, from what I've heard. And now I'm walking around. I'm in pretty good shape 2 months later. But yeah, that's just one of those things where you keep thinking I'm going to get back to something. I need to get back in a rhythm. I need to get back to writing. And life gets in the way, Had family members with heart attacks and other crises. But maybe hopefully that's all a little past. We're heading up to the Pacific Northwest, stopping here in I guess, what would you say generally, the
Mountain West.
The Mountain West.
We are the Mountain West.
The Ogden, Salt Lake area, to visit Lance and his family, and it's great that we were able to do that.
We like having you.
Thank you. It's great to be here. And we were here for 2 years before. That's where we met the first time. Kids were in the military, after I had retired, and they were stationed at Hill Air Force Base, and so we were here for 2 years. So we got to know the area, we got to love it in a lot of different ways. Everything but the allergies, but it's great to come back here for a few days and say hello and tell a few stories.
Yeah, David and I met at a was it a FanX?
Yeah, the FanX in Salt Lake City. I think it was.
Yeah. That's actually coming back this year.
Yeah, that was 2015. I think is where we met. Yeah.
Oh wow.
Well, that's a good story though, because we both had tables. I had a book table selling physical books just like this. I wasn't really very good at it. I wasn't selling very many of it, and I was going down the row. And Lance is here with his books, and I'm like, wow, that is a really good looking table. This guy knows what he's doing, and he just looks the part of the author. It's like the hat,
It's the hat, ladies and gentlemen.
That's right.
It's all about a good hat. You had a pretty rockin' hat yourself, though.
Did I have a hat on that time?
Oh, you absolutely had.
Which one? Did I have the top hat, or was it
you were rocking the top hat.
Was it the steampunk one?
Steampunk top hat.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, when you're an author at a convention or something, you got to do something to set yourself apart. So sometimes I've got a dragon themed vest or whatever, but you got to do something that's a little costumey without going too far out there. But anyway, I was just walking down the rows and authors, and I kind of made eye contact, and
that was the first mistake.
That's the first. And he takes a book. I don't know if it was this one.
It was that one.
It may have been Price of Creation. Yeah. And he says, would like to tell you, or what do you say?
Want to hear about a book?
Want to hear about a book. That's what it was. And it's like, wow, that's a great opening line. But instead of acting like, I'm coming at it from an author point of view, not a reader point of view. And I said, not really, but I'd love to sit down and talk to you about how you sell these books. Because I notice you're selling a heck of a lot more books than I'm selling. So we sat down, and then I think I ended up, after an hour or two of just talk and shop and learning a lot from Lance, because he's a great in-person seller. I actually took my stuff off this other table that I combined with other people, and we sort of set up a ghost table.
We created a combo corner table.
Yeah, there was enough space to kind of stick a table in there with no permission from anybody. And I put my books out there, and I sat there, and I sat at the feet of the master. And so as far as selling books in person, he's a master, because he's done it so much more than I had. And I learned a lot. And even though I never really made my living off selling books individually or in hard copies, I really learned a lot, and it was great to make that kind of connection with another author. And then I did my best to help you with your online sales, but I guess I reached the limits of my abilities. We couldn't really get your online sales going, but I think your books are just, they're in certain mold, and they sell really well in person to a certain audience, but it's not necessarily the online audience.
It's an ongoing thing, I mean, the more authors I talk to, the more communities I join, and how-to tutorials I watch, and all this sort of stuff, the more I realize there are many paths up the mountain.
Well, there are.
And just because even one approach doesn't work doesn't mean it won't work down the road. And that really becomes the great author trial, is deciding where you want to spend your energy, your money, your creativity. Because you could plug away at something with a year, see nothing, and then it takes off. Or you get absolutely nothing back, and you just run it clear into the dirt, and it's an adventure.
It is.
It really is.
And I'm going to preface this next monologue by saying you really ought to, if you're any authors out there, you guys are, if there's any aspiring authors, write what you love. That's the key. Write what you love. But once you've written what you love, or once you're writing what you love, then you sort of think about marketing and all those other things if you want to be an independent author. And the interesting thing is what would I call middle grade books or high school grade books. I'm not talking about YA. I'm not talking about like Twilight and Hunger Games. I'm talking about the things that are genuinely aimed at, that you could give to a precocious 7-year-old or a 12-year-old that reads a lot. That is still very much print. They don't have too many Kindles, and they pretty much, the parents like to give them a physical book, put it in their hand, give them a Christmas present, give them a birthday present, have it on their bookshelf in their school, and they can take it out and read it. And I mean, it's very tactile. So if you're a middle grade author or that type of author, it's a different dynamic in the digital world. But the adult digital world, and when I say adult, I'm just talking grown-ups, not erotica, but just the general adult grown-up fiction, science fiction, mysteries, thrillers, things like that. That digital has captured a huge amount of that in the past 10 to 12 years. By unit sales, it's more than 50%. By money, by dollar sales, it's somewhere been hovering around 35 to 40% for quite a while. So in other words, independent authors as a whole, people who publish on Kindle and various things, move more copies than all the publishers in the English-speaking world, as far as I understand from all the data that I've seen. But of course, many of those copies are given away free, and many of them are discounted, 99 cents, $2.99, $3.99. So of course we can beat them on price.
Yeah, but you can do in digital when you don't have to, pay for typesetting and covers and inks and blah, 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 blah.
Exactly. So if you're an aspiring author, if you're interested about that, do your research, figure out what genre or what your market is, and then do the appropriate thing, assuming that you want to sell. But again, I go back to that idea of write what you love. Always write what you love or you will burn out. You got to write what you really, really want. You got to have a joy in the work, and it's not work. I think Mark Twain said, work is something a body is obliged to do. In other words, work is something someone must do, whereas anything else is play. If you choose to do it, it's play. And if you can play and you can make a living at it, what a wonderful world that is, right?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Now, I also wanted to go back. You mentioned earlier, I forget your exact wording, but essentially you're being nominated for some awards. Can you tell us some of those experiences?
Oh, well, I mean, there's been some little things here and there. I would say the one major one that I would claim to any sort of fame, that you would actually find me on Wikipedia or something, is that I was a finalist for the 2016 Hugo for the best novelette. Now, the Hugos are a science fiction award, and then they have...
So that's one of the largest awards for science fiction.
It's arguably the most prestigious. There's also the Nebula, which is maybe its counterpart.
That's what I was about to say, between the Hugo and the Nebula.
But the Hugo is voted on by members of WorldCon, which could be anybody, whereas the Nebula is voted on only by members of the Science Fiction Fantasy Writers of America. I think I got that right, SFWA. So in other words, the Nebula is an author's award for authors by authors. The Hugo is essentially a fan and award, not just any fan, but people who are who are willing to pony up the membership costs and buy into WorldCon. And you go to a WorldCon, either pay for it or you get different types of membership. The point is they're a little bit different, but they're roughly co-prestigious. Most people think the Hugos are a little more prestigious, but it doesn't, not that important. And then I will mention the Dragons, which is a science fiction award essentially for the fans, and people vote by email. So that's sort of the third. Those three are three major science fiction awards. There are also some fantasy awards and some other things, but I'm mostly focused on science fiction.
Now, I heard there was a little bit of controversy with the Hugo Awards, weren't there?
Well, there was around 14, 15, 16. I kind of got caught up in that. Myself, I'm, try to be apolitical or politically centrist. I don't go too far to the left or the right, or don't have any big dogs in the fight. And then there was some stuff happening with there was some more, I would just call right-wing folks that were thinking, hey, this is a great award. Let's try to get our viewpoints and values more pushed up in these awards, make some more awards. There was controversy over their methods, which ended up with the Hugo's voting procedures being tightened up, because some people viewed it as, well, these guys are manipulating. Other people viewed it as, well, everybody's done this all the time. The only difference is this is an outsiders group rather than an insiders group. And so it kind of exploded in a lot of, mountains out of molehills, or a lot of people arguing each other. But I got put or viewed as being in sort of the right-wing camp, which I don't believe I am. But that was because the publisher who published the story that got nominated is viewed as more of that right-wing type of publisher. But I will say this.
So it's more of an association sort of thing for you.
But the interesting thing is I didn't go get published by them because of any of their politics or background or any of that stuff. I did it because Jerry Pournelle, and if you're a science fiction reader, you might have heard of Jerry Pournelle. He was a classic author from, I think I would, I'm just guessing, pulling this out of my educated guess, but I would say he published probably in the range from the 50s to the 80s. but he was maybe into the 90s. I'm not sure if he was still publishing. I did meet him at the 2016 Hugos. He was still alive, and he died shortly thereafter. He was on oxygen. Great guy. And he co-wrote with Larry Niven and a few other authors. But Niven and Pornell was pretty common for that, especially that highlight of the 60s through 80s period where they were publishing at least, they were publishing a book a year, sometimes more. Some great stuff, Niven and Pornell. So anyway, he was putting out, there was a series called, or an anthology series called There Will Be War. And he had put out the first, I believe, 9 volumes of that with his publisher. I don't remember who that publisher is, probably shouldn't even take a guess, but it was one of the major traditional publishers. So they put out the There Will Be War series, edited by Jerry Pornell, anthology. So they were stories, but they were cohesive. He tried to make them cohesive. They were all military-related science fiction. Well, he put out a 10th one, and he put out a 10th one through this particular publisher, who many people viewed as sort of a right-wing sort of publisher. I came along because it was Jerry Pornell. I was just tremendously excited to get a military science fiction story into a Jerry Pornell anthology. And because of that, I got a push from people who happen to be in that realm, right? So it's more like, I write military science fiction. Military science fiction may, in some senses, appeal more to people who view it as more right-wing. I don't know if that's true or not. I'm sure if anything you saw was military science fiction would be very broadly appealing. You've got Star Wars, Star Trek, BSG, all this sort of different science fiction shows on TV. I don't know that they're particularly political, but anyway, that's where people try to pigeonhole me. And I went to the awards, and there were people tugging me each direction. There were people coming up to me and going, hey, this, or nobody spat in my face, but there were definitely some cold shoulders. I mean, there was one guy, I won't tell you the name, but if you told you the name, you'd recognize it. A TV producer, major guy associated with major science fiction television series. And I walked up and tried to talk to him, and he basically snubbed me. Because as soon as he heard my name, he snubbed me because he thought I was some kind
You're
of
one of those
people, yes. But in reality, I didn't consider myself that way at all. I just wrote what I thought.
Did you know what was going on, why these people were snubbing you, or were you just really confused at why these people were acting this way?
I think I knew it intellectually because I'd heard about it. I'd heard people talk. As soon as I was nominated for the award, some people were talking about via email and other things and saying, well, there's this controversy, but I hadn't really educated myself. I hadn't gotten deep into it, so I didn't understand. So I had some intellectual understanding about it, but I didn't understand the visceral nature of where some of these people are coming from both sides or other sides. I don't think there's always two sides. I think there's various sides in a matrix of
yes.
intersecting interests. Certain people want this, they want this, and other people want that, and they're competing values. And, I just wanted to tell a good story from my point of view. And I didn't want to offend anyone particularly, but I also didn't want to bend my writing to anybody's agenda, whether it be that right, left, or anywhere else. But yeah, it was very interesting. And I met some wonderful people, some very gracious people on all sides. And I think it really comes down to individuals. It certainly did there at WorldCon 2016, where the 2016 Hugo's World War, which was in Kansas City. Kansas City? I think it was Kansas City. St. Louis or Kansas City. I get them mixed up. I apologize to everybody from St. Louis or Kansas City that I would mix those up, but I'm pretty sure it was Kansas City, Missouri, where the WorldCon 2016 was, and it really came down to individuals. As authors, as fans and stuff, the individual people, they brought their own prejudices. So some people were like, hey, I disagree with this and that, and I got an opportunity to explain. And sometimes they just, a few of them just, there was one, I was talking to a publisher, I was like, hey, I've got some books, maybe I actually want to get them traditionally published. And as soon as they figured out that I was the Hugo nominee for this particular story, nominated by this particular other publisher, they basically just went, the wall came down,
man.
But at the same time, there were some other guys that were extremely opposite of that. And they said, well, we understand that, and you're associated with these guys, but we really are happy to have you. And it's great that you're represented, and, we like different voices, and even if we don't agree with you. And it's like, I don't even know what you're not agreeing with, because I just wrote a story.
It's a military science fiction story.
I just wrote a story and it wasn't controversial, but apparently that, just because, again, the publisher and the owner of the publishing house was very controversial, and then had caused I don't want to say caused, but had triggered controversy. Then it became this thing. So that's pretty interesting. That's the closest I've got to some of these crazy stuff you sometimes hear about behind the scenes. I mean, you hear about with Hollywood stars, you hear about with awards, you hear about, infighting and all that. And I didn't like it. I really enjoyed going there, talking to authors. I met all sorts of awesome people. Like I said, Jerry Pournelle, Eric Flint. I met Larry Niven. I met astronauts. There were astronauts that went to that from the actual, no kidding, space shuttle astronauts that I was able to meet, and all sorts of really fascinating people, publishers and other authors. But that's the closest I say what I brushed to fame and fortune or whatever.
I do have to ask. We can move on here in a second, but do you feel like the controversy helped or hurt your chances of actually getting the Hugo? Because you were a finalist.
I think the controversy ended any chance of getting the award, because I think the general consensus was moved against that, the place that they tried to perceive me as being pigeonholed. So it's like being, my analogy was my analogy was people who don't know the difference between North Korea and South Korea, or North Dakota and South Dakota, or whatever. And I like to use North Korea and South Korea. They hear, oh, you're from Korea? What kind of crazy communist are you? No, you don't understand. There's this North Korea with the communist authoritarian regime, and there's South Korea, which is a free and open society. And if you don't know the difference, because you just hear Korea and you assume something. So they heard some trigger words, and they just thought, okay, this guy must be bad, because he's in that camp. And I said, no, I'm not in that camp. I just got tarred with the same brush. So
people,
what can I say?
I swear people love to oversimplify. It's easy.
Sure.
And yeah, that's that. And there you go. You fit nicely in this little box, and don't tell me anything more, lest it get complicated.
Sure, and the more, of course, everything is out in social media, the harder it is to, never having said an insensitive word, made a mistake, or do something that's taken out of context. All I can say is try to treat people as well as I can, and as equally as I can, and don't disrespect people. That's the best I can say. But back to being an author. We've wandered off a little bit.
It happens. It happens.
Well, it is true. I mean, what about you? Have you had any ever had any negative reaction to you because you're an author, or because people think you're doing something that you're really not, or advocating something you're really not?
Yes.
I see there's a yes in there. Let's hear it.
Yes.
Let's hear the story.
There absolutely has been a couple. For instance, in The Price of Creation, there are people who are incredibly afraid of this young boy who was born with a destroyer's stone, right? He's destined for violence, and there is such a level of fear that there is actually a mob that forms to go and kill the child. And I heard back from a teacher that a mother had become incredibly offended, incredibly angry at me personally, that I was somehow promoting infanticide. Also, the main character, at times, he was kind of trained towards violence, and so he did kind of lean that way. And so there was one person who felt that my book would create terrorists who use violence to get their way. And my favorite, there is a book, my third book, The Price of Loyalty. Mm-hmm. And there is a character in there I just love. His name's Aegon. Mm-hmm. And he is a bitter old sorcerer. Now, I made him as colorful as I possibly could without using any foul language. Okay? And I was very proud.
Sure. Because your books are family friendly and mostly aimed at sort of the middle and high schoolers.
Yes,
absolutely.
I'm in for that 6th to 8th grade. And so, no language, none of that. And so I was very proud of this character, how much I've been able to make him look angry and bitter, but without using foul language. And I'd used a variety of other insults, just a rainbow of insults that I was very proud of.
Sure.
So I show up at a school that I've come back to year after year after year, one of my favorite schools, right? And the teacher presents me with a written letter. This thing is pages that a parent had written into the school protesting, first of all, that they had let a fantasy author speak to their children. And then they had gone through and itemized all of the horribly offensive things in the book. It was almost a shot-by-shot gathering of all of Aegon's dialogue. Almost everything he said.
So, and that's a great example of if my contention is craft doesn't offend people generally, but art will. And so that is a validation. When you write something and you offend at least a few people, any piece of art is going to offend somebody. And art is individual. Craft, you can admire a great piece of machinery, but there may or may not be any art to it. But you see a piece of art and it speaks to you personally, and sometimes people get very offended, take it personally, and read things into it that really aren't there. And folks, if you ever become an author and you ever gain any sort of relative notoriety or fame or whatever you want to call it, a little bit of well-knownedness, if that's a word, you will have people writing bad reviews of your books or coming up to you and saying that sucked, or along with the good stuff. There's always a few, no matter what. Every book you can think of, the Bible, from the Bible to the to the Aeneid or the whatever. Every classic book has its detractors and haters.
Oh yeah. I have to tell a story. First of all, I consider Brandon Sanderson's The Way of Kings to be one of the best written fantasy books ever.
Sure.
As far as epic fantasy. It was masterfully done.
Sure.
So if ever I want to feel better about my own negative reviews, I go on there, I look at the 1-star reviews.
Oh, yeah.
Because there are people who hated that book. And I'm like, you know what? People on the internet are crazy.
Oh, yeah.
But, sorry, one story. This is your interview, but I have to share this
I think
story.
he's talking to you guys. You're all crazy because you're on the internet.
Yeah. But people.
But they're out there. They are out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's always haters. Haters going to hate, right?
No, it was rough because one of the really bad reviews I got was right at the very beginning of my career. It was one of my very first Amazon reviews, and I was certain I was doomed as an author. And I remember it got oddly personal, right? Because the narrator in my stories is the historian.
But that means that people engaged with your books and your characters.
They
got personal. That's good.
But this was someone saying, there was this historian character, and they came right out and said, these were actual words that a human being wrote on the internet. They said, I feel like the historian was arrogant, and I feel like that means the author is arrogant, or the author is full of himself as well.
Yeah, I think.
And I was like, what? Like, how do you connect?
I want to say it was Stephen King. I might be wrong, but it seems like Stephen King or some relatively famous modern author. It's something about a reader. There's a name for a reader who believes that the characters are speaking in the author's voice, and that name is an idiot.
Now, and Stephen King is famous enough to pull off that kind of quote.
I know that's a little harsh, but what most people seem to not necessarily realize is a good author, just like a good actor, creates and inhabits characters that are not them, and don't necessarily articulate their own views. So just like an actor could play the same actress or whatever. Let's just take Cate Blanchett. Okay, she's played villains, she's played heroines, she's played all sorts of other characters. Nobody believes Cate Blanchett is that evil villain or that or that hero necessarily. They're just an actor. Well, by the same token, an author is just an author. Nobody believes Stephen King, well, he is sort of an odd fellow, but nobody believes that he's going to resurrect pets and send them to kill their former owners or anything like that. They just...
Well, on the internet, there's probably somebody, right? There's probably somebody, just sure.
Well, I've had, and one of the ways I know that I'm somewhere in the center is that I've had bad reviews saying, "What is this leftist claptrap?" And the other thing is, "What's wrong with you, you right-wing scumbag?" And in the same, for the exact same book, and like, okay, I think I'm hitting a mark somewhere in the middle because I've got both sides attacking me.
Oh, look, I've offended everyone.
Yeah, exactly. If I offend anybody, it tends to be, if I'm consciously writing anything to offend anyone, it's usually aimed at what I see as evil, hypocrisy, foolishness, dumb stuff. So yeah, they've got a few characters that are caricatures of, stupid people in real life, but that's all there are. They just had taken aspect and maybe exaggerated a little bit, but it's not because there's any political agenda involved. It's just because that was frickin' stupid. and I'm okay with highlighting that. And I'll make a villain say that or do that in my book any day.
Yeah, I've always said that, to make a really good villain, you don't have to create some big cartoonish thing. You just have to take a regular human fault, human vice, and just take it one step farther than everybody else.
Sure.
And that's all it takes. Though, it was actually going to be my next question. You already started to touch on this. A very common question for authors is, do you base any of these books, scenes, and or specifically characters off of your real world experiences?
Experiences, yeah, absolutely. Most people think that characters are based off individual people, and I would say that very seldom is that true. In my experience, both firsthand and secondhand, very few of my characters you can point and say, I just lifted that from an individual, and very few other authors who I've spoken with ever say, well, yeah, this guy's just that guy fictionalized. Not too often. Most of the time...
I've done that.
Yeah, okay, good. All right. I've done it once or twice, but I mean, out of dozens, if not hundreds of characters, I've done it maybe twice. That I'm literally saying this is just that guy or that person. But most of the time what you're doing, and you probably agree with me, most of the time what I've heard is, and what I do is, you take aspects and traits, and you combine them, and you say, okay, I'm just going to take this one. I knew this guy when I was in the military, and he did this, or he had this particular attitude. Maybe he was always going on about his experiences in his one deployment, and now he's just a REMF, a FOBIT, a rear echelon guy. But man, he got out there that one time beyond the wire, and that's all he ever talks about. So I'll have a character.
Glory days.
I'll have a character that's how it's like, it's like the 1 foot time the second string quarterback got in and won the big football game, and the guy will never shut up. It's 40 years later, and that's just an aspect, and then you make that into a character, and that character may be one-dimensional, two-dimensional, or whatever. You stick that on, or you mix and match. You say, well, this is my protagonist, and I'm going to give him these positive traits and these negative traits, and you kind of create a human being like you create a Mr. Potato Head, but it's of course much more richly realized than that. And then sometimes people connect with that, and they say, I knew somebody just like that. And I've actually occasionally been accused of saying, well, you must know this person, and you just stole that from him, or you stole my idea. That's always funny too. It's like, no, there's a finite number of ideas out there. If I've got thousands or hundreds of thousands of readers, because I've sold over 500,000 copies, it's got to be somebody that had the same idea, so they think I stole their idea, and it doesn't work that way. It just doesn't work that way. There's only so many plots, only so many ideas, and you're always going to see something like that.
Oh yeah. I know what I always tell people, because I've had students at schools ask, how do you come up with a really original idea? I said, don't. You are what makes it original, right? Your experiences, your unique voice. You and I could come up with we could even sit down and workshop the exact same book, right?
Sure.
This is the idea.
Sure.
We each go write a book. Our books are going to be different because, our influences, our things are different. So, I've always told, aspiring authors, just write. Don't get so hung up on, is my idea different than all other ideas?
Oh, no.
It's not. Yeah. It's really, really not. Yeah. And if it is, it's probably not any good.
Yeah.
If it were truly new, it's probably because it's awful.
Yeah, what I see is that readers often they want to talk about the ideas. Oh, that was such a cool idea you had. And it's very hard to explain to somebody that, no, I didn't really have that idea. I just figured out a new twist on that idea. Because just like you, I'm a reader too. So I read thousands of books before I ever wrote a book. And so all those ideas get mishmashed in my head, and of course they've come out. And so I didn't steal anybody's ideas. They're just there. They're in your consciousness. They come out, and then ideas are easy. It's execution that's hard. It's like I can understand about how to run a football play. I can't throw a football. I mean, throwing a football is the hard part, right? Being a football player in the NFL level, or being an author that can sell a lot of books and make a living at it, that's the hard part, not the getting the idea for the thing. It's the actual execution and doing it well. It is the way I like to try to explain it.
Oh no, that's perfect. That's perfect.
I see something. I have to look at my glasses.
Oh, there have been a
few comments or
a couple
questions?
comments. First of all, we did have a clarification that WorldCon 2016 was in fact in Kansas City.
Okay, great.
So good job there.
All right, good.
And then we had someone, T Stash. Welcome. He's been on, or he or she, I actually don't know, has been on here before. Was expressing some incredulity for
like
people being
mustache,
angry.
right?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes. Now I'm trying to picture an actual T-shaped mustache,
Yeah.
but I can't quite pull it off.
that's a good name though.
Uh,
He says angry
thanks
for
for watching.
for a story. What? Well, it's just like anything. You see anything you see on the internet, it's outrage porn, right? People get outraged. They love to be outraged. They attribute a certain thing to a certain person, and then the comments start piling on. And like I said, there were only a few in-person instances of that being snubbed or whatever.
See, I really, really like what you said earlier, that craft doesn't offend, art does.
Yeah, hardly anybody's offended by a hubcap, or even by a beautiful muscle car, which can be artistic, but nobody's really offended by it.
Right, but nor are they inspired by it.
Yeah.
So
sometimes.
if you're going to make that deep connection, right, if you're going to go for a real connection through words with a reader, yeah, you're going to be pushing on people's emotions, and people are going to react differently.
Yeah.
And yeah, if you're, something that wouldn't offend anyone also isn't going to inspire anyone.
I sometimes try to explain to folks who, let's say people are outside of the fan community, people who aren't into what you would call fandom in general, science fiction, fantasy, comics, games, also, the broad fandom. I'll talk to a sports person and say, I don't understand that at all. It's like, well, don't you get worked up? Haven't you seen bar fights break out over sports teams?
Oh,
I mean, strangely enough,
there are
even
entire gangs based around soccer teams in England,
well,
right?
well, what's interesting is even though the United States is sometimes viewed as a more violent society than say the Europeans, yet European soccer seems to break out in more hooliganism than American football. I mean, most of the time American football doesn't come to like people killing each other in stands in the stadiums, and yet you've had soccer hooliganism. Actually, you had big old brawls and broken bones and stuff. But my point is, people can get worked up and get offended over anything they really choose to, anything that has a story and a connection and an affect on their emotions. So it's by the same token. So, I don't think they were angry because of the story. They were angry because of what they perceived as my connection to who published it and who promoted it and who, it just went down this whole big rabbit hole. And yeah, that's not that surprising.
And generally speaking, I often see the most negative reviews, or the most common negative reviews, are frustrated writers saying, essentially, here's how I would have done it.
Or you're no better than I am. How come you're achieving success?
Yeah.
And
what?
And the only thing I can say, and I actually felt that way because I've gone back with a writer's eye and read some of the old stories that I really used to love from writers that came before me. And sometimes, there is a certain green monster of jealousy. You look at it and go, this really wasn't actually that good. And yet I loved it and it inspired me, but I could write better than that. I did write better than that. Well, it's easier to be an editor and easier to improve on something than it is to actually create it in the first place. And then the other thing that's really important to understand is the connection between competence and success is extremely loose. It really is in the arts. It's very tight. If you're a pitcher, a baseball pitcher, it's very tight. You're either a good pitcher or you're not a good pitcher. If you're a great pitcher, you achieve success. If not, but with a writer, you could be a great writer and achieve no success. You could be a hack writer or write the most horrible stuff that you can imagine. I won't name any names, but you can think of some books that have sold millions of copies, and yet you read it and you go, man, this writing is absolutely awful. Yeah, and so the truth is, and just like TV shows or whatever, it has little to do with quote competence or what's good writing. What it has to do with, did you connect with the readership? Did you sell books? Did you inspire them? Did they get excited about it? Was it cool? And so on. So I don't consider myself any better than any other writer or some other writer who hasn't sold as many copies. I got lucky. A lot of it is lucky. A lot of it is putting yourself in a position to get lucky, like a poker player says.
Luck favors the prepared.
Luck favors the prepared, but that's what I said. You put yourself in a position to get lucky. You try stuff, and you keep trying stuff, and you keep trying stuff, and then it's like they say about rock bands. Overnight success takes decades.
Yeah.
Right? So yeah, there's that. So I was really fortunate that within 2 years of publishing my first books, I was actually making a living. I mean, that's amazing. And I'm so blessed to say that. Many people never got that. And many people actually got way more than I did. I mean, there are people that published basically one book. Okay. And I'm not in any way downing him, but Andy Weir that wrote The Martian. Okay. He essentially wrote, that was basically his first book. And I have no envy or jealousy, a little bit of envy, no jealousy whatsoever to think that he basically wrote his first book, sold a bazillion copies, made a movie. He's super famous. He's like the pinnacle of the writer lottery reader. I'm somewhere in the middle. I did better than some people, worse than some people. It has nothing, really little to do with my competence. I put a lot of hard work into it, and I got lucky. I do notice that Mr. Stash there, or Miss, I don't know, or whatever, gender neutral, T Stash, says, any experiences of too much dependency on validation? Yeah, I'll tell you one. I know a writer who could have made a living at it. Wrote 3 books, boom, 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 did pretty well. I helped him with it. There was some traction, some success happening. And then he sort of seemed to turn and divert into doing more with like getting validation from friends or people and going to shows and giving away books and coworkers and saying, I'm an author, and I'm an author. And it's several years later, and I think he's just maybe finishing up his 4th book or something like that. So, and this is not you, by the way, because I know you've had your dry spell as well. You did, but this is not you. But I did, yeah, someone who did that, who essentially got diverted because they forgot that that writers write. And they forgot about writing, they forgot about publishing. They just became obsessed or maybe distracted.
Addicted, if we were to take or dependent.
Yeah, chasing the validation. So I would say that the validation, I didn't put myself up for any awards. I've had a certain amount of recognition. My focus was always write books, sell books. Because my thought was, I want to make a living, and I want to get free from the government job. I want to get free from the day-to-day grind. If it's a day-to-day grind, it's going to be my grind at my house, my place, where I want to be. I want to be
my terms.
Yeah, I want to be self-employed, and I want to do it. I want to be my own boss. I am married, but that's another story, So, but roughly, basically, my own boss. My lovely wife supports me. She's done great work in marketing and stuff. So we're a partnership. We're a team. So that's just a little joke. She's super great. But I've always just focused on writing, publishing, selling. And if any awards came along, they just came along incidentally. But then there are some people who
hopefully help with the selling.
But some people chase the awards. And if that's what they want, that's fine. Some people work on one book every several different years. They work on a book for year after year after year, and they want to get this perfect book, and they really want to get the award. And then sometimes they bemoan that they can't make a living as a writer. Well, I think it's like any profession. You have to do and do and do if you expect to make a living at it. I mean, you can win awards with one item in the arts, one painting, one whatever. You could have one performance in a movie, and that could be it.
I think it's people chasing that, the Martian thing, right? They feel like if they can get an award, they'll get recognition, and they'll get their day in the sun and bazillion copies sold without having to go through all that grind. But there's something almost sacred about the grind.
Yeah.
You earn your way to the top.
Yeah, everybody wants to win that lottery. But and it used to be, especially with traditional publishing, only. That was the only route. You had to get lucky. You had to get your book through that gate. You had the agent, the publisher, and so on. They had to choose it, and then they would market it, and they would push it, and then you become a success, an overnight success. But now it's rather than trying to get up that cliff in one jump or one pull, now it's more like climbing a mountain step by step. Because as a self-publisher or as an independent publisher, you can publish your books, and then you can connect with the readership, and put the next one and the next one. You can improve books. Like I may have mentioned, this was my first book I wrote, one of my most successful, first one in the series, Eden Plague. And I tell you, I must have rewritten this book 30 times. If I told you where it started out and where it ended up, it would be unrecognizable.
Oh, yeah.
So I was a little bit in that camp of just rewriting the same darn book. But at a certain point, a couple of my author's friends said, you're going to need to get off that. Stop rewriting the same book and trying to make it perfect. It's good enough. It's pretty good. Move on, write the second book, and then the third book. And once I did that, all of a sudden I had this forward momentum, and I wanted to write the story and write the story forward into the future, and then it became different sort of an addiction, as he says.
Yeah, I think there was an old saying, something along the lines of "Don't let perfect become the enemy of great."
That is or the enemy of the good. Yeah,
or enemy of the good. There we go.
That's a great saying, because you can obsess too much over perfection, and you never move on. Because books are somewhere between an art and a craft. There's art to books, but there's craft, especially in genre fiction like science fiction.
There's art, but don't neglect the science.
No, don't neglect the craft. I mean, most artists learned craft and then they made art.
Yeah, because that's your foundation.
Yeah, if you're going to be a sculptor, you need to learn the craft of actually.
Yeah, then you move from there.
Right, and then you create art. We
do have a question in the comments here from Four Shot Pastas. Welcome. Now, looks like they're working on their first book, 19 years old. And yes, is there anything not very obvious you would suggest?
Not very obvious. Well, I see there's a number of obvious things that someone who has gotten into the writer community learns, and then they become obvious, but they forget that they weren't obvious when they first started out. So I'll say one of the first things that I didn't necessarily realize, but I eventually learned is your early work is always going to suck, okay? Unless you happen to be a prodigy, the rule of thumb is your early work is going to suck. So write that first book. Don't expect to publish it. Just write it, put it in the can, write another one. There's a strange subset of the writing community that thinks you should keep working on one book, but that's kind of like working on only one exercise if you're working out. Well, no, you need to work the whole body, and you need to continue to work on it. You can't just work one muscle and expect to be a weightlifter or to improve your health or whatever it is. So you got to write books. Writers need to write more books. And sometimes the education community, God bless them, the people that produce people with masters in fine arts and stuff. I have relatives with masters in fine arts. I myself only have a bachelor's degree, but the masters in fine arts community would sometimes try to tell you. I don't want to be too definitive here, but sometimes the message is you got to be really good and really skilled before you even take a shot at writing a book. Like as if you had to, that would be as if you had to graduate with a music degree before going and doing a gig in a garage rock band. Well, no, that's not true, obviously. Sometimes you learn by doing. So if you want to be a writer, just start writing the darn thing, get your feedback, start hearing from people, get feedback from readers, get feedback from authors, work your way through it, go get to your education. Sure, if you want to go to college, yeah, that's great. But don't be afraid to just write and get better and then look back and go, oh, man, this sucked, and throw that in the can. But move on to something else, because you're only going to get better by doing and doing and doing. And I would suggest that most people are successful because they keep putting stuff out. Bands are successful because they keep putting out songs and albums. Actors and actresses are successful because they keep getting jobs, and eventually they move up the ladder and they get a series or they get a movie, and all of a sudden they're recognized and they work their way up. It's the same with authors too, I would suggest. That would be my obvious thing, is write your first book, but don't obsess over it, then put it aside, and then write your next book, whether it's a series, the next book in the series, or just something completely different. But just keep writing, and keep writing stuff that's new. I mean, 19 is young. It's a great place to start. You're old enough to control your own destiny and put stuff legally up online and sell it. But you got lots of years in front of you. So that's what I would say. Don't start when you're 41 the way I did.
The analogy I often use is someone learning how to play basketball. But they grab the basketball and they think about shooting it. They examine angles and, their foot placement. And it's not how it works, right? That doesn't work. It's never going to work. Shoot it, miss, go get it again, and 1,000 times over.
And then sometimes people have to be ready to hear the theory. They have to practice and get their hands on that basketball. And at a certain point, they'll say, "Hey, coach, why is my shot percentage not that good?" Well, let me explain some of the theory of it, or maybe explain some of your stance. And you got to do this a little different. Oh, okay. Well, now I'm ready and receptive to do it. But a lot of people start out as tactile learners that just want to get their hands on and hands dirty. That's great. So I think for me, I tended to go back and forth from doing and thinking and doing and learning and then doing and theorizing. And then so there were different points in the journey where I was ready to learn stuff. So, but my suggestion is always to do. And then when you're ready to learn, sometimes, there's an old, I don't know if it's kind of a martial arts thing. They say when the student is ready, the master shall appear. And then the master is ready, the student shall appear. And then I think they incorporated that into Star Wars. But it was a martial arts saying before that. I think I remember.
Yeah, we had another one from T-Stash. So in essence, consistency is key, taking cadence, I think possibly precedence over focusing on quality all the time. Mind if I take this one?
Yeah, good one.
There was a story. I don't know if it was a true story. I actually think it might have been. But it was a teacher teaching a pottery class. But they did sort of an experiment where they divided the class into two groups. And one half was graded purely on quantity to the point where they just weighed their stuff at the end of class, right? Just create pots, bowls, whatever, and just chuck it on the scale. There you go. You get an A if you manage to just crank out, 5 pots a day or something like that. And the other group was focused on quality, right? And they studied technique, and they just had to produce one good or nearly perfect pot over the whole semester. But, they had one group focusing on quantity and the other group focused on quality. Well, the end of the semester comes. The quantity guys are producing much, much, much better stuff, right? Because it's all these fine touches, right? All the subtlety that they learned while just cranking out bowls or whatever. I think the Beatles, somebody would have to, it's the internet, so there are probably a lot more rabid Beatles fans than I do. But there's a lot who say that their success came after they were just working at some place, just an ongoing gig, and just playing every single night, sometimes for hours. And it was that had to come first, just that quantity, that sheer, raw, grinding power of practice.
Yes. Yeah.
And writing is the same.
Yeah. People say practice makes perfect. I don't think that's true. Practice makes permanent. Only perfect practice makes perfect. So if you practice, you will continue to improve. And so just like you mentioned, say a guitarist, all the theory in the world and the perfection of technique doesn't matter if they don't put in those thousands of hours. With writing, again, I'm not sure if it was Stephen King or some other famous author that basically said, you're only a writer after your first million words. Once you've written your first million words, then you probably don't suck anymore. It was the gist of the message. And I look back at some of my early stuff, and I had to go back and revise a lot of my early stuff with a later eye, because once I'd written a million words, then I go back and go, okay, I can improve this. And one of the beauty of digital is, unlike a physical book that's out there with a publisher and it's just out there, with a digital work, you can upload a new thing. So at least the new people buying it will get something a little bit better or a little bit different, something you view as better. It may be as simple as better editing, or it may be actual revisions in the story. But hopefully you've become better, and then you go back. Oh, here's an example. There's a little. This is the first book I wrote. It's sort of the first book in the series. I call it Book Zero, Eden Plague. I wrote this book, Reaper's Run. I think this was the 5th book I wrote. But I put this book as a series intro because it's a choice. It's like you read this one or you could read this one. And people have read them both, go, this is a much better book, because I had improved in 5 books. And so a lot of times I put forth this one, or I'll give this one away, or suggest people read this first, because I was simply better at writing by this point. And even though
of course you were. It was your 5th book.
It does. And they take place at the same time, so it doesn't really matter where you start in the series. But it's a perfect example of how it's actually, I was actually better. And people go, wow, that's a better book. And no matter how many times I revised the first one, I never got as good, clean a book as one I had conceived of and just written as I was better. And that's the same reason that sometimes you'll see many things, it would be it actors or bands or whatever. It's like their second album was the best album. The second, Star Wars movie was the best movie. Things like that. It's once you hit a stride, and maybe a team or an individual, they hit a stride and they do it. So for a writer, you just keep writing and you'll hit a stride, and you'll hit a sweet spot, and you'll start. It's like when you get a new video game. There's an early part, and you're just figuring it out. And there's a point at which you hit a stride and you start doing everything instinctively, and then people want you to be on their team because then you're actually good at it. That's the same kind of deal. So excellent. I would focus on doing many iterations, much practice over quote quality, because it's very hard to even define what quality means. Quality means different things to different people once you get beyond basic English.
All too often, quantity is just your path to quality.
I think Napoleon said quantity has a quality all its own, too. So
there you go.
So if you think about some people who have just put out many, many, many books. Okay, James Patterson, pretty good author, fantastic publisher, visionary, created his own publishing empire. Most successful author by money terms in the modern century, I believe.
Really?
Because he kept control of all his works and he created his own publishing company. So he's the highest paid author for decades because he kept it all himself. But what does he do anymore? He farms it out. He got co-authors. Okay, so he keeps a consistent high quality, but nobody's going to say this. He's not his books are not the ones that are necessarily winning the wow, incredible awards. He's just consistently, solidly high quality, like a chain restaurant that you really like. And there's nothing wrong with that. But why did he how did he achieve that? He's published, I don't know how many books under his name, 100, 200?
I don't even know. It's a large number.
He published a buttload of books, and most of them are pretty good quality. I've read, a couple dozen of them. And most of them I've enjoyed. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. But what he really did was he figured out a way to be, to sell and to market and to connect with a readership and build a readership. And a lot of times that's what a readership does. They want to see more stuff of that same story, just like a TV franchise. Some parts of the TV franchise are good. Some Star Treks are good. Sometimes some people like DS9, some people like the original, some people like this, some don't like that. But some of it connects with everybody, and everybody knows those words, Star Trek. You probably would be hard-pressed to find a person in the English-speaking world that hadn't heard the word Star Trek and know that there's some kind of TV series out there. So it becomes this thing of its own and keeps it relatively consistent, high quality. And so that's something that you should be shooting for. And to do that, you have to produce a lot of work. And get your name out there and keep trying. Persistence.
Oh, yes. Well, excellent. We are actually over time at this point. No. It happens more often than not, to be honest. We did have one last question, again, from our friend T. Stash. Could the lesson of quantity of doing over focusing on the solitary quality apply to several aspects of life?
I think it could. I think there's always going to be a debate between working on one thing, one individual thing. It's like a hen with one chick, or do you just have a bunch of chicks? Do you do a bunch of projects, or do you just do one project? I can't answer that, but I would suggest that the evidence indicates that doing a lot of things in whatever that realm is will yield better, just like your story of the pottery class, will eventually yield better results, because practice, if you continue to do, you will get better. Mastery only comes by doing. It can't come solely by theory and education. It comes by doing, whatever that realm is, be it sports, be it writing, be it acting, be it, whatever. You have to put it into practice. You got to get your hands on and do it. Yeah.
Because there are those, I feel like they're the exceptions that prove the rule, because you do have the freak geniuses.
Sure.
Right? Write one book, it's amazing. They win all the things, make all the money, and go home. Mm-hmm. But that's not how everybody else works, And so, yeah, I would say that for most people, I think that applies to most aspects of life. If nothing else, it's a really good way to think. Because if you get too obsessed about, oh, is it good enough? You stop trying if it's not going to be good enough. I think it's better to have this long-term view of, I mean, me, I will fail upwards my entire life, because I know it's a process. And so I don't stop myself because I'm worried about failing. Yeah, I'll fail. I'll try again tomorrow.
Well, and another way to think about it is you got a lot more chance of success if you keep putting a lot of bets on the table, whatever that means. A lot of bread upon the waters, you get it out there and something is going to catch on. I mean, in today's terms, let's say social media terms, let's say somebody wants to be an influencer. They do a lot of memes, they do a lot of videos and so on. Sometimes they do it and they do it and they do it. But then that one that seems to catch the public eye and goes viral, right, is the one that all of a sudden makes their name a household name. It's very similar in any sort of endeavor like this. You're really trying to get a little luck, position yourself to get lucky and get your name out there and build a following and catch that lightning in a bottle, so to speak.
Yep. Well, excellent. Thank you so much for coming on.
Hey, you're very welcome. This has been great. Very interesting to do. Haven't done one of these,
great time.
Anything like this in a while. It's inspiring. Get back to it.
Any closing words?
Don't let the pandemic ruin your life.
There you go.
Get back to normal and do what it is that you love, and love what it is you do. And it's a cliche, but the truth is, if you love what you're doing and you keep at it, keep persisting at it, you'll probably achieve success. And then if you can turn that into a career, then maybe you'll never have to work in a day in your life, right?
There you go.
If you can play all day at what you love, you don't have to work anymore.
Okay, and where can interested people find your books?
DavidVanDykeAuthor.com is my personal author website. I also have a Facebook page, David VanDyke Author, and I think they're probably going to throw a link up there or some kind of thing.
Yeah, we'll make sure there are links in the
go to Lance Conrad's page. I've commented on him before, so you probably do a search there and find me. But you can find my books if you're interested in sci-fi or whatever. First three books are free on all the different platforms, the digital platforms you read on. So you can get the first trilogy called the Plague Wars Trilogy and read 3 for free. And if you don't like them, you haven't lost anything, but a little bit of time.
So there you go. Excellent. Thank you everyone for joining us. Next week, Thursday, 6:30, we're going to be back here with Story Stream, and we are going to be talking about siege warfare. Mike will be back, and that's going to be a good time. We've been saving up some stories for this one. There have been stories that maybe had to do with horses or even mad scientists, but we have saved some of our best, our juiciest stories for next week, talking about siege warfare. So make sure you don't miss that. Remember, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff, and thank you all. Good night.